The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people are evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spent a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. It was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Hawaiian Volcano Tracker update. Today is Wednesday, November 23rd, 2022. We're doing our broadcast one day early due to the US Thanksgiving holiday tomorrow. And as we prepare for the coming days here, Dane, the volcanoes are fairly quiet, but there's other stuff happening around us, huh?
Yeah, one of the things we've been keeping an eye on is this cold front that's been coming in from the north. It's supposed to make landfall sometime tomorrow and cause some pretty severe surf for the north-facing shores. They're talking about 20-foot faces on these things, so that's very large waves. They're large enough to run the Eddie Big Wave competition. But yeah, it's going to be stormy and nasty. And the thing is this is coming in from the north, and that's kind of a peculiar angle for the wind to come in. And one thing we know about Puna is that the trees here are somewhat fragile to the wind, and when you hit them with something that they're not used to, they're extra fragile. So it's concerning just to see what kind of power outages and down trees we get tomorrow. Hopefully this thing misses, kind of hoping for the best. That's happened plenty, but right now it's going to be at least a close call if it doesn't break some trees.
Yeah, and just like the volcanoes, it's all about preparedness. You plan for the worst and hope for the best, and many times that happens. it just goes by, and then you can just say, oh, thank God I didn't have to use any of that preparedness. But if it does happen that we're all cut off, or some of us are cut off, then you have that preparedness to fall back on. So that's the MO still. So
Right.
just like the storms, we're trying to keep volcano preparedness going, and that's why we're broadcasting all the different little wiggles volcano does week to week, even if it's sometimes more consequential and sometimes less consequential. And things are fairly stable this week compared to last week, or really 2 weeks ago. It's been fairly stable for the last couple of weeks, and yeah, not a whole lot happening on the surface really.
One little last thing for the weather before we go. Anybody that wants to keep an eye on that, I'd recommend Puna Weather. It's a Facebook group ran by our friend Harry Durgan, and he does write-ups every day, sometimes twice a day, on the current situation. Give a little bit of a unique perspective on the weather from a citizen scientist. Right. He does good work. I mean, he has a good group of meteorologists, professionally trained, type thing that help him out. So really good guys. Recommend them.
Yeah, so if you're in the Puna region especially, then that's the group to check out.
Yep. All right, well, that'll do it for me for now.
All right, so maybe I'll just get into it here and start our summary. See what I can get lined up here. Start off with this nice picture we have on screen that Dane pulled out from us from the S1 camera. Been some rain coming through this week before any of this storm activity. More light stuff, but still enough to create a whole bunch of rainbows. I mean, I say lighter in the sense that it's not like one of these big fronts coming through, but at times the downpours were really intense, like really, really, really loud. And so some of the webcams you'll see some of those rainbows coming through. But starting off in Kilauea, let's summarize what's going on here. Story on Kilauea really is that the lava lake level is very slightly dropping. So this is a plot of the lava lake level over the last month. And the scale here on the left is a little bit blown out because there's some noisy data right in here. But really, it's noticeable perhaps from somewhere in here or so. Somewhere in there. This is going to draw for me. So somewhere in here, down to over here, there seems to be a decline in the lava level. It hasn't come down a huge amount. We're talking about maybe a meter, 3 feet or so in the last week. But it is a fairly consistent drop over that time there. So it's pretty interesting to see that despite everything else happening in a volcano, shallow level the lava level is very slightly dropping. It hasn't affected the viewing at all. The viewing is still great. So if you have a chance to get out and see it, then it's still recommended. And the park has some viewing tips to avoid crowds as usual at this time of the year. So that's the short version for Kilauea, if you only have a few seconds here. And from Maunaloa, here's a plot of the recent earthquakes. Over here on the right-hand side is where we are now. And for the last 4 days or so, we've had the earthquakes back in this 10 to 20 range per day. That follows the previous 4 weeks of about 40 to 50, we'll call them, at the peaks of these events up here. So highly elevated background, and this down here would be just the elevated background that we used to have back in mid-September back in here, similar to that. So mid-September we came up, we had that really high intense flurry there, then it returned to this highly elevated background, dropped down for 5 days here, not quite a month ago, or a little more than a month ago I should say. And then for the fast 4 weeks it's been elevated, and then now it's dropped down for 4 days. So we'll see if this drop continues, but it wouldn't be unexpected to see it come back up like it did again and go through these periodic adjustments, right? The volcano is filling with magma still continually, and as it fills, it's pressurizing and it's trying to move and adjust. And as it does that and fits and starts, you can see these different pulses almost of activity that last, in this case, about a month or so. So that's really the curiosity, is just waiting and see what exactly happens next. At this exact instant, everything is looking pretty low. Earthquakes are down, and no other signs of activity near the surface. So that is that actual summary from the USGS. I'll show you guys on the screen here. Let's start our Maunaloa report. And USGS is still saying no signs of imminent eruption, no eruption happening. It's still most likely driven by renewed input of magma 2 to 5 miles or 3 to 8 kilometers below the surface. So get my meter going. Like it there. So 2 to 5 miles beneath the surface. Only 16 earthquakes in the last 24 hours. That's in that lower 10 to 20 range. And otherwise, all the information in this daily update is similar to the previous days and a whole lot of change there. So that's our source. We're just making sure we cite that. And that's where we're taking these monthly graphs and combining them to show you guys that 2-month plot that was just on the screen. So here's just the last month. The scale is a little different. Only 80 earthquakes per day as a maximum on this side, and the previous one was up around 200. So even over the last month, you can see about a month ago, we're coming out of that little lull that lasted 5 days, and here our most recent low on the right side of the graph. And zooming out for the last year, you can see that first pulse, there is that little low, second pulse, and here we are. We'll have to wait to see this earthquakes per week value come on the screen over the next couple weeks here to see how long that actually lasts too. And still for the last 5 years, zooming way out, it's still an overall busy few months here, earthquakes per month, and we've had over 1,000 earthquakes in each of the last 2 months here. We may reach that here for this following, or maybe not quite. We're at 800 earthquakes right now. So over the last week, here's an incremental snapshot of Maunaloa Summit. Still having these events at intermediate and shallow depths, that's orange and red here, northwest of the summit. And we have that area that we have the dike thought to in place. Maunaloa at shallow level is in here. It's the shape of the reservoir, more or less. And as it pushes upwards, it's causing these shallow earthquakes marked in red under the summit. As it pushes sideways, then it causes these to the northwest, but it also causes the southeast flank to be able to move, and that's how it's gaining, adjusting, and making space for that magma that's coming in. So all that is normal. It's really about the rates that's happening, and that's when you think you might have a big enough adjustment that could lead to an eruption. We haven't got to that point yet. We haven't seen the signs of that happening yet. That still could happen, or it could wind down. It's still unknown. For the last month, you see a clearer picture of that accumulation of earthquakes in those areas. So that's the seismic story. We move on to the tilt here. No big jumps in the tilt that are the most obvious signals we've seen, noted by the USGS as shallow magma inflation. Maybe if you look at the 1-month plot, maybe this little increase right here is one of these renewed inputs of magma into the shallow regions. It's hard to tell, but in any case, it's nothing really huge, just not blowing out the chart, and it doesn't seem to be leading towards an eruption. It's just a normal adjustment and development of that magma reservoir, and the pressure is shifting around in different parts of that blade. So the previous adjustments we had were really back in early October that we saw on the plot at the left end last week. For the GPS, looking across the summit, the length across the summit is still increasing, right? This trend is still coming upwards. Not as fast as some previous times, and it was right around here that we had that series of flank earthquakes highlighted by that 5.0 under Pahala. And since then, we've been coming up, and maybe came up a little faster, but we still haven't accelerated to something like this high. If this thing turns upwards more and more, then that's when you'd worry about an eruption. Or if it wiggles back over, you'd be less worried about it. So we're just still waiting to see. It's still obviously rising and spreading, and the GPS is detecting those deeper levels underneath the summit rather than the shallow stuff that tilt would pick up. So magma is still coming in, it's still adjusting, and that's the story on Maunaloa. Summit's still getting pushed up, different timescales of that. So looking at the southwest rift, upper parts of the volcano here, at 10,000 feet, the tilt is still dropping. You look at the GPS levels. This is now the 2-year plots, and the level I want to look at is the up and down level here rather than the east-west component or north-south component here. So up at Ainapo Trail at 12,570 feet elevation, you can see it's no longer rising, and that's similar to that pattern you see lower down at 12,140, no longer rising either. Had been rising, you can see previously for several months. Whereas some of the stations further down at 10,000 feet and below, you don't really see that rise a few months ago nearly as much. The pressure hadn't propagated all the way out to swell the balloon that far. So, but what we're seeing is that it's not as swollen or doesn't seem as pressurized as it was back in the last couple months when that earthquake flurry to summit occurred and when we had that big flank adjustment. So it's still filling and still adjusting, and it's just a matter of how long it'll take to go to the next cycle of doing that. So let's move on from that. Yes, and look at the earthquakes here for the last week. Across all the island. There's one background event up here in the north, close to the head of Waipio Valley, 2.8 at 15 kilometers down. That's one of those settling earthquakes. We have our cluster of earthquakes down here in Pahala. That's typical, ongoing. Let's see, the largest event we've had in the last week was that one a week ago at 3.9. Down in there, 3.6, 3.5 down in those deep areas as well. And let's see here, zooming into, let's look at Kilauea first real quick. Not a whole lot of earthquakes on Kilauea, and we have a couple of these interesting little diamonds on here. Marked this other event, there's a 2.5 and a 2.6, 2.4 actually. So let's look at that first real quick, and the easiest way to look at that is to come to this tweet that Dane put out to USGS Volcanoes, asking about these two other events on the page here. And the response is that these are tremor locations. Shouldn't have been pushed to the NEIC catalog since they're experimental, but it's part of a system HVO is testing to better locate tremor events. Magnitude in this case refers to the energy released by the tremor. So there is the answer, and Dane, you want to say anything about this little exchange?
Yeah, I'll jump in a little bit. So we had a bunch of people just messaging me after as soon as we went offline last week, basically asking about these earthquakes. And it was one at first, and then we had another. Those diamonds that signify the other event. We've seen those before, right? Main one I remember is the collapses from 2018, right? Those weren't earthquakes, but they would generate, it was the force of the caldera basically collapsing, right? A sudden drop. And that would generate the force of like a magnitude 5.3 earthquake. We also saw them at the beginning of the Pahala swarm, I believe, right? And that was just a short-lived classification. It's basically a catch block classification right now, those diamonds. If it's not an earthquake, right, and it's some other event that has, related to earthquakes, just not a traditional earthquake, then it would be classified as one of those diamonds. So just because if it's a diamond really doesn't tell you all that much. You got to go in a lot deeper on it because it's just it's like an other category. If it's not a traditional earthquake, it's other, and whatever that other is, you got to talk to a seismologist to kind of let you know what's going on.
Yeah, it sounds like they're refining it, so hopefully that'll get updated with something other than other. Maybe it'll say tremor someday or something like that when they're done with their testing. We'll just have to wait and see, I guess.
Yeah, hopefully.
All right, so...
But yeah, that was interesting. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Dane. Thanks for that. So let's move on and look at the earthquakes of Maunaloa, since that's what we're focused on right here. And there they are, in that colored by age view, right, with the orange ones being in the last 2 days and the yellow being in the last week. So this is all of the last week, unlike that previous plot we saw, which was showing all the small events as well. So it's still ongoing here, and you can see that the northwest side clustered in this one area, and the southeast side a little bit more dispersed across this area over here in the southeast flank. Yeah, and of these, there is that largest one that occurred on the 17th, 3.0, right around sea level, right up in there. It's the one we highlighted on our stream last week on Thursday. We're not quite a full week since our last update, so some of these are going to... All right, so moving on from that view, let's take some other views, and I like to keep bringing up this cross-section that we put together of the earthquakes that occurred back in September through mid-October under Maunaloa, both directly underneath the summit right in here. That spot to the northwest is this cluster right over here that's slightly deeper. That more dispersed southeast flank, that's kind of all these things, and that Pahala earthquake cluster, the big flank adjustment, that was all centered right over here. that on a map looks directly over, but it's disconnected by this big gap in depth from all these deep pahala events that are right in here. And those of you guys who look at that earthquake map closely and see those two different clouds of deep pahala events, that's visible here and here. And occasionally you get these other events over towards the Kīlauea side. So any of those pop up? I believe there may be some. Here's the last 2 weeks in cross section. So there are a few off to the side of that plot, and you can still see some adjustments happening on the flank, a little bit more dispersed to the southeast and along that basal edge of the volcano there, and still having those earthquakes appear directly beneath the summit and that spot to the northwest right in there. So in order to see it a little more clearly, let me just go back to the last couple of days. This is the last 2 days. So pahala, fine, yeah, here is the Maunaloa ones, and you can see it's still adjusting, but it's not as many dots as we've seen on these plots in some of the previous weeks. So it seems to be slowing down a little bit in this adjustment. That's why the earthquake counts are down. And switch it over here to show you guys this now depth and time for the last 2 weeks here. You can see that, well, pahala is this blob on the bottom, so it continues. It's kind of not really related to the surface stuff directly. I mean, it is connected there, right? But there's no direct earthquake happen in pahala and then something happens on the summit that you can see convincingly some amount of time later, right? So it's kind of two separate groups of data. We're really focused on this top cluster right here, and compared to 2 weeks ago where we were having a lot more events and across a much greater range of depth, you see that really in the last couple of days it's a lot more reduced there. So really, long story short, is the webcam of Maunaloa summit for the last week, day and night, and nothing really evident on the surface. Changes still happening within, but still nothing that would convincingly lead to an eruption. That's really the bottom line among signals that we're seeing on it there. So that's all the data. However, we want to bring up this week's Volcano Watch next. And this week's Volcano Watch is almost like a reprise of the Volcano Alert and Aviation color codes. So they're once again coming in here and explaining these different color codes. There's the ground-based advisory, which is normal, alert levels, which is normal, advisory, watch, and warning, and that corresponds to aviation color codes of green, yellow, orange, and red. And depending on the kind of volcano and where it is, sometimes these are not necessarily corresponding, right? In fact, when they put this program together, Kilauea was noted as a exception case, because quite often it can have ground-based watches and warning without any really eruptive threat to aircraft, and so it could have been Kilauea at an aviation color, green or yellow, while having a alert level of watch and warning. So, however, we have heard that on Maunaloa they're treating these as being pairs, just for clarity and ease of use. And that's how it often is at other volcanoes nationally, the national system here. And so they go through and recap all the different terminology here, what normal, advisory, watch. All right, so normal, non-eruptive background, advisory, activity level elevated above background, right? That's that yellow. Watch is the orange level, right? Eruption is likely, or an eruption is occurring with limited hazards. That's what Kilauea is at right now, is at orange because the eruption is happening, but limited hazards. And warning meaning imminent, underway, or suspected, or potentially with greater hazards by location there. So the color code is discussed here was originally put up for the aircraft because they really thought that pilots needed to be as basic as possible to be able to not have any miscommunication. So similarly, you can have that red significant ash emission, orange is eruption likely, eruption with no ash, and down green and yellow, same as normal advisory there. So here's some of the interesting stuff that they're restating. To determine the appropriate volcano alert level and aviation code, HVO monitors activity around the clock with all the data. Knowing exactly when to change the volcano alert level and aviation color code can be challenging. We do not have set thresholds. Each situation is different. We decide by looking at all monitoring data, previous unrest and eruption patterns, and what is known about the processes occurring at the volcano. Typically, there is extended discussion among HVO scientists before a change is made. Sometimes the designation is unchanged for many years, although occasionally frequent changes are warranted. Kilauea's current status is Watch Orange. The ongoing eruption is confined within Maunaloa crater, posing no threat to life or property, and eruption has no to minor volcanic ash emissions. Maunaloa's current status is Advisory Yellow. This reflects elevated rates of earthquakes and ground formation above background. This activity indicates that magma is being supplied to the Mauna Loa's magma chamber, but that at this stage magma is not moving beneath the ground to erupt on the surface. Signs of magma on its way to erupt appear, or if Mauna Loa returns to background levels of activity, still on the table, HVO will change Mauna Loa's volcano alert level and aviation color code. So they describe the method that this is done through these VANs, activity notification statements that they put out, and notices as well, and summarize, right, that they communicate the degree, and in some cases, time frame of eruption. So they are once again just restating this, and Dane, I'm going to ask you to jump in here once again and give your input to the setup here, right? They're almost setting up for something. What do you think?
Right. So we've long talked about these color codes and the alert levels and how they could maybe be better utilized, right? Opportunities that have been missed and things along those lines. But one of the big issues is, each volcano has its own unique color, or basically system, to be able to determine if it goes up or down in the alert level, right? So with Mauna Loa, one of my complaints is that it feels like the threshold for between green and yellow could be adjusted just a little bit, because it would have been nice, like say 2 months ago, or a little bit over 2 months ago now, when the initial rush to get information out about the heightened unrest and the statements were made by USGS, I called it yellow plus, right? Because they went from yellow to yellow, but includes daily activity notifications. So that could have been, if the threshold was adjusted, a move from green just to yellow, right? And that might have been more impactful, and it would be nice to be able to have those levels be a little more flexible. One of the issues, like we experienced in 2020, was the alert level for Kilauea managed to jump from green all the way to red, skipping yellow and orange, right, in the aviation. But we think of them as being combined, the warnings and the color codes. But yeah, so that was one of the, it feels like it could be better utilized, and it's good to see that they're leaving on the, like if Mauna Loa does go back to background activity levels, then we'll bring it down to green. Okay, well, it already says in the article, like, that's somewhat arbitrary. So where is it? It's always easier to implement, some protocol than it is to define when it goes away, type of thing, as well. So it would be also nice if the green could be used as a what was it? Just a stand down, right? Just to tell people, like, hey, we had heightened unrest, we were watching it, the earthquakes have gone back down, and we think it's now within our threshold. Hey, we can do things like reopen summit trails for the time being, or things along those lines, because it just seems like without that, it's going to be hard to say, like, okay, we can stop being concerned for the moment with Mauna Loa, right? We know we'll have to do it again, but for the moment, type of thing. So that's my little, opining on this, the aviation color codes and the alert levels.
Yeah, I mean, it was a few months before, I mean, for many months. Well, how long? 6 months before September, we've been talking about how Mauna Loa could have been a green.
Yeah.
And
it's not like we're doing this with 2020 hindsight. No, we were saying this at the time it should be green. And then when it moved, it's like, well, I guess it's yellow plus now, right? Because you're already at yellow.
Yeah, so that's obviously our point of view, and I'm sure that there's some within HVO that probably had a similar point of view, but that's not how it didn't actually end up changing ultimately, right?
Right.
And so, well, maybe they'll adjust it. We'll see. It's kind of a fit this fairly rigid system to the changes you actually get, and try to figure out what actually works and what public use of it and all of that. So we'll see. Maybe they'll adjust, and it sounds like they could be setting up to actually go back to green potentially after that explanation. If they were to go to green, they can just point back and say, "Look, read our explanation." So we'll see if they do it or not. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
but I will say that we went maybe 6 months at a kind of reduced rate, and that wasn't long enough for them to be convinced that the alert level could be changed down to green. And even when it went up to yellow back in end of 2018 to 2019, it took I want to say 4 months or more for it to go from green to yellow of increased activity. So
Yeah.
while that might come back down, I think it will probably take a while here. You'd guess at least a month, if not several months, of it being lower down for them to actually drop it back down, because then you're more convinced that it's not just like a little pause in the cycle, but it's actually the cycle is broken. And if the cycle lasts 1 month, then you probably want to wait at least 1 month, right?
Right. It's rough. I mean, you got to choose your thresholds and everything, and try and justify them and make them work in practice. Right. It's not about how they work in theory. It's all about how it actually works. When the time comes to actually deploy these things and to notify people. Right.
Yeah, and that's part of preparedness is working out a good system of alert, right? And so I think that's happening, and so we'll just keep an eye on this.
see.
And that's really what we can comment on, because this is an article we've seen before, and this information is not new. Ultimately, there's nothing new in this article, so it's and there's basically refreshing everyone's memory and having something more recent published.
I was kind of surprised that they didn't include that they were going to synchronize the aviation codes and the alert levels on Maunaloa, because that was something that was disclosed by Ken Hahn, the scientist in charge of USGS HVO in Pahala at that community meeting.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll see. Maybe it's not a hard and fast thing like that.
Right. Maybe not. We don't know. Yep.
So as we're talking about preparedness here, that's kind of the point of this Volcano Watch, but we're going to transition it over here to article series that Dane has started. What if a 1926 Maunaloa eruption happened today? What would happen? And as a way to consider the challenges that you would have during an eruption, Dane has started this series that's going to take us through day by day a recap of what would happen with that physical expression of the volcano and today's societal constructs that we have, right?
Right. It's a lot of going off what we learned in 2018, right? Because we went through it and we saw a lot of things that you would never expect to happen when you were, thinking about it before you've lived it, type of thing. And going through it, you just kind of see reasonable expectations on how things might work next time, right? And taking a historical eruption like 1926 is a bad eruption, right? It's gets into residential areas, it destroys a small village, all kinds of, it takes the highway, issues, right? But it's not the worst case scenario for Maunaloa. It's just a standard. This is a bad eruption for the south side of the island. So we go to take it through that way, and it tries to place reasonable expectations upon USGS, civil defense, all the emergency managers. And since we're talking about it now, we're just talking about the alert levels. I do assume in this thing that the alert levels are handled properly and with plenty of time, that nothing is really missed, that any issues that come about from the alert levels is due to the volcano giving little notice beforehand that it was going into like an imminent sequence. But anyways, the whole situation goes into a first-person perspective, right? So it's taken from kind of a layman that doesn't know the all the eruptive signs and things to look for, also doesn't have the experience from 2018 or Pu'uo'o days or anything before that. So they're just kind of winging it in terms of their understanding. So it also, one of the things about that is they don't have a comprehensive understanding of all the moving parts that are taking place all at the same time. So one of the comments I was seeing was something like, "Oh, well, these volunteer organizations would be activating to provide relief." It's like, yeah, but common guy doesn't even know that exists and doesn't know where it is and doesn't know. They just don't know. So it goes through that first person, right? We right here. I've released so far day 0, which is the lead up to the eruption, and then in the middle of the night, the eruption comes and it's on 3 a.m. We are going at the summit of Maunaloa. The alert level jumps. There's a bunch of earthquakes, and social media is just absolutely losing their minds, right? And that's almost a law of the internet. Is when something like that goes down, the internet is going to lose their marbles and come up with probably any conspiracy theory or over dramatized explanation that you can think of. And that's what I assume here. And then we get just right into the summit eruption. Right now it's just day 1 and 2. The next set is going to be titled Reprieve the Calm Before the Storm. And then it really does, this 1926 eruption throws a curveball at people and gets them lulled into a false sense of security before it really starts going after people, type of thing. So we're going to see how that kind of plays out with the more modern approach to eruptions that we have today.
Cool. Yeah, interesting perspective to take us through there. So yeah, thanks for doing that. And
yeah,
we'll all enjoy it, following that as we go on. So that is Maunaloa, and one more kind of a thought experiment, right, for preparedness that you could go through. Consider like, oh, I would know that, or oh, I would do that better, or I wouldn't do that, or I'll probably do exactly the same as that guy, or whatever. One more way to consider.
And the thing about like our audience is, if they're here, they probably have a higher level of understanding than the person that is being written about in this little exercise. So if you're sitting there thinking like, oh, I wouldn't do that, you're right, you probably wouldn't, and you're probably ahead of the curve. Good, but a lot of people are in that position.
Well, yeah, that's really a good reminder of like why we actually do this, right? Why we put these live streams on, and why we do all this volcano education is really for better preparedness, so that you can know better and help your neighbors and all. So that's really ensuring, yeah. So this is just to restate what you said earlier. This is also not like what we would expect our ideal response to be, or how we think, how we would look at it from the top level looking down. It's more about from one person's eyes who doesn't know surrounding stuff. Right, not how we would cover it or anything like that, right? So this is just a very, very specialized.
And a lot of it's just coming from like all these stories that we know from 2018, right? Because it's like, I didn't live it, but I was sitting next to the guy that lived it, and at the hub, and we talked multiple days about what happened and what is happening. So yeah, I'm including that kind of stuff into this type of story because it translates well, right? Things that you wouldn't expect to have happen are going to happen.
All right, that's Maunaloa, Dane. Let's say our thank yous.
All right. Well, first we have our sponsor. We'd like to thank them, I Care Hawaii. They are making sure we keep an eye on Maunaloa, ensuring that this Maunaloa segment, has the proper preparations and everything that needs to go behind it. I Care Hawaii does everything from eye examinations to LASIK, to cataract care and surgery. They kind of do it all. They also maintain the practice in the areas that are most impacted from the volcanoes. So they're kind of in they have a stake in this whole thing too. So really appreciate I Care Hawaii. They do the same day glasses and lenses fitting, so you can go out the door with a new pair of glasses. So you got to get those taken care of. I know me and Phil still got to go in there and do that ourselves. To check out I Care Hawaii, we highly recommend them, and we appreciate their support. We also have a couple super chat. Oh,
that's part of preparedness. Yeah, making sure we can see. We better go get our glasses.
Yeah. Probably. It's becoming like a shrew underground at this point. Like staring at the computer monitor too long. But yeah, I Care Hawaii, we appreciate them. We also want to shout out the County of Hawaii for the Vibe High grant to ensure that we have a bunch of content in different formats being produced and written in short video and these live streams. So we really appreciate the County of Hawaii taking a little bit of a chance and stepping out and ensuring this type of educational content and the stuff that you need to basically be resilient instead of just talking about it, right? So we really appreciate all that support from the County of Hawaii through the Vibe grant. We also had a couple super chats come through. Want to thank them. Real quick, we had Gary Bryan come through with $35. Says, thanks Philip and Dane for keeping us up to date. Happy Thanksgiving. Appreciate that long time support there, Gary.
Thanks,
And
Gary.
we had Judy Menzel come through and say with a $25 super chat, said happy Thanksgiving. Appreciate that, Judy, and that support. Thank you guys. I think that gets us through that segment. So here's a first for you. I don't got any questions.
All right.
Like,
well, let's just keep moving through because I do have, I think the back half is a little bit more stacked. We're going to talk about Kilauea, and then we're going to talk about the possible connection of Kilauea and Maunaloa that comes out through this one paper that was just recently published.
Right. So yeah, maybe that will be where the questions really start to flushed out.
Yeah. So if you guys can stick around to the end and get the connection and this new connection of Kilauea and Maunaloa, we've talked about how there's connection through the pressure deep down through that hotspot pathway, but we've also talked about how the volcanoes lean on each other and they can basically push, and that's an interesting thing this paper talks about, how Mauna Loa's inflation at shallow levels could affect Kilauea's shallow summit system too. So that's where we're going to be going with this. But first, we got to cover Kilauea and figure out exactly what the signals there are telling us. And we can't quite figure it all out, but we'll cover it for you guys here. And anything before we jump into Kilauea, Dane?
Michael T with a $5 super chat says happy Thanksgiving. And with that, I am out. Thank you, Michael.
Hello, Michael. Yeah, so actually, before I jump right into Kilauea, I will just mention our community corner real quick. We did cover the Rapid Ohia death talk in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, After Dark in the Park last night. I think that's on Facebook. We'll put it on YouTube at some point here shortly. But otherwise, there's another After Dark next week on Tuesday. There is no community events going on this weekend as far as these community gatherings, Makahiki. We were at Waimea last weekend, Dane, and saw lots of good people there and talk story, and so that was great. That will resume in I want to say in a few weeks' time here, so we'll come back to that after Thanksgiving and jump back in. But next week's After Dark, just to note it here, is the Aloha Rodeo with David Woolman, which is 3 Hawaiian cowboys competing in the world's greatest rodeo on the mainland, Wyoming there. So that should be pretty fun. All right, so that's the community corner. And now let's move into Kilauea. And Kilauea will start with our volcanic hazard summary, starting with this VOG map from the VOG mapping project, University of Hawaii. And because the SO2 emission rate has gone down quite a bit on Kilauea, it's also reducing the impact of where the VOG is going. And just talked at the top of a program here about our expected wind coming through. When the winds end up being strong, it kind of focuses a plume in one direction, which means it's not quite as spread out, but it can be intense in one area for a little while before it swings back and forth and out of the way. So the next couple of days it's showing forecast downwind to Pahala, to Na'alehu ocean view areas, but seems fairly transient compared to some of the other weeks that we've looked at this. So, but VOG continues to be the primary hazard of Kilauea's eruption. Even when it puts out as little as 300 tons per day, it's still a lot compared to industrial standards, and it could still cause health effects for sensitive people in the downwind areas there. So just noting that that's still happening. And you can go to purple air. And for example, go to a place like Volcano and see that there are occasional little spikes coming through, but really it's been in the green. And let's see if we can get anything been up in the yellow. That one's slightly higher in the green. Put on Pahala. Pahala not quite in the yellow. Down to Huku. Also not quite. So it's been better than some weeks. So with that lower emission rates, and lots of rain and wind clearing out the air too. So thankfully it's been low, but it's still an impact. And in the national park, here are all the monitors. Everything's been in the green all day. Put it back to the map here. Current wind is coming out of the northeast at 8 miles per hour. The plume blows southwest, and all these dots up here that are green are showing that the viewing areas and visitor attractions in the national park are all in good air. Have been all day. So viewing is still good and still on the table, and that's what we'll transition into next here is our lava viewing. I'm going to do this briefly so we can get to the more interesting changes, but in case you are coming to the volcano and wondering where to go, the main visitor center is right in here. There's a trail to Kupinaipali overlook from the east, which gets you to see that main active lava lake. It's a long way away, so you need to bring some kind of magnification binoculars, something like that. Or you can drive all the way around to Devastation Trail and walk to the Kanakakoi overlook that's over here and get a slightly closer view. Still need to get it magnified because it's a big area. It's impressive, and the lava lake's not the only thing to look at. We'll cover that here in a bit when we look at our visual observations and photographs from the USGS. But obviously that's one of the main attractions when you're going to come at sunrise, before sunrise, or sunset, after sunset, to be able to see that. Right, and the reason I like sunrise and sunsets is you get to actually see all the other features that are not glowing red on the landscape. All the craters and cracks and colors of the minerals accumulating by the gas vents, and the different collapse zones and old eruptions, lava flows in the crater floor. There's all kinds of cool stuff to check out. So viewing is still good. One thing to note, the Uikahuna Overlook up here to the northwest, as far as we know, is still currently closed because of this Nene protection. And so Nene breeding pair with chicks up there, and no parking, and the trail, I believe, is closed off as well up there. So as far as what it looks like, we'll use a B1 camera that's on that east side. B1 camera is not all the way up here, but it's down over here. Like, it's a similar kind of view, just a little bit closer in. So we still need to zoom in to see what's happening there, but the lava lake's in this back area right in here. I'll play the last week, and you can see at nighttime that glow. And with binoculars or a big lens, you could zoom in and see the lava moving around, spattering, shooting in the air. Another little glowing spot here in the front. So sometimes you might see lava spattering and bursting through there. And you can see some of these other features in the landscape, these little hornitos, little gas vents that have sputtered lava to build these little cones. Little in the sense that they're 30 to 60 feet compared to that entire crater wall, which is, several hundred. So lots of cool things. There's cracks and the gas vents all around, and viewing has continued. Be good for the last week. And it may not last forever, right? So we're seeing some changes happening deeper in the volcano. So story for this last week, as we started off at the top of the show, is the lava level is actually dropping within the lava lake. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but the viewing may not last forever once again. It seems like it could be possibly dwindling a little bit, and just like Maunaloa, you got to wait and see and give it more time to establish the true long-term pattern. But if you haven't seen it, I'd suggest going and seeing it while you can. Here's a photograph from the USGS, actually from that Kanakakoi overlook, so you can get a view in the daytime of what that might actually look like. And there you see all these different steaming crater walls. Lava lake is back here, silvery in appearance, and you see all this other cool landscape all around. So that's the lava viewing, and we will go from lava viewing straight into Kilauea observations, practicing our kilo observing skills. And with this USGS release, we have other photographs. Mid-morning view of the southern portion of Hawaii Ma'u. This is on November 17th, so not quite a week ago. There is that silvery crusted lava lake, west vent complex here, all these different spatter cones that are stacked one on the other here that have been pushed and deformed. And you see quite a lot of fume coming from that area primarily, but also quite a lot of other fuming spots in the crater floor that are dispersing that gas, not just from the main vent, but this whole crater floor, which is close to 300 acres there. The active lake surface, zoomed in, like this. A couple of spattering spots here, and back over here. And this has got a cool caption that's noteworthy for a little education here. The direction of flow is west to east, bottom to top, this direction there. And what they say here is the size of the plates that move across the surface are related to the speed that lava is fed from the vent. Bigger plates move slower, smaller plates move faster. Plates seen here are much larger than those observed in the same place a year ago. This means that the current effusion rate of lava is much smaller today than the effusion rate a year ago. You're looking for, like, that's kind of one plate and another plate and another plate. Those are the different textures that are coherent on there, and another plate. That's the different pieces of crust that are getting rafted and moved from the south, bottom of the picture to the top of the picture, west to east actually here. Another photograph here, view from the Maunaloa crater floor. This is intriguing, right? So we actually have a view from on the ground within a crater. So obviously the USGS flew down in there on the 17th and gave the scientists access to the crusted floor of the lava lake. And see right here, they're right on the ground. And as we have been describing, this is a time of, seems like, lesser input of lava into the volcano. So it seems like we're not having ooze-up flows. We haven't had ooze-up flows in a long time. So that would be the main hazard of being down in this area. And since those seem to have not occurred for a while, this would probably be as safe a window as you could pick. Go and do that. So interesting. So there's that central island from eye level visible over here, right across the landscape. Just because it is a unique view, I'm going to click on that original here, which gives us a chance to click and zoom in and see what that actually would look like from that angle. There's that west, that might be the old north vent complex over here. The west vent might be actually behind to the side. Pretty cool views. See what that would look like if you're on the ground there. And since they were on the ground, take some pictures of those hornitos, those little spatter pictures. And this one here, a hornito located on the eastern side of Maunaloa crater floor. The colorful nature of the hornito comes from the various gases that come out of the magma and precipitate on the surrounding rock. Many of these colors are from sulfur that is abundant on Kilauea magmas. So let's give you guys a good view of this one as well. There is that colorful sulfur-coated top of that hornito. See, each of these is a blob of lava that shot out of here with a gas coughing out and just landed on the side to build this feature up. Interesting. Actually see crack down on the bottom of it and lava's glowing through there. Still hot inside. This is basically essentially a skylight or an opening in a lava tube with a pathway of lava underneath that crust, and when the gas is coming through there, it'll release through that little hole and throw that lava out to create this feature. So it is essentially related to the lava pathway underneath this hardened crust. And there's another one, that's this one. Tall, thin hornito on the eastern side of the crater floor of Maunaloa, made up of spatter. So there was a crack in the lava crust, and it was basically spattering out at just enough rate that it would just build up higher and higher and higher and higher. And cool to see this. And you can imagine that as the crater floor has been rising and falling and changing shape and adjusting, this thing probably won't last forever. At some point it'll tip and break off, and you'll get more of that rubbly at the bottom. Very cool to see, and including where you see that really yellow patch at the bottom there, where the gas is coming out of the lava trap beneath this hardened crust. It's really cool. Usually the yellow where you see the crack, the more directly from the magma is where the gas is coming, right? So if you see it more whitish, like it just could be steam from the groundwater coming through towards this hot rock. But when you see the yellow, then you can be pretty sure that gas is coming from the magma itself to have that much sulfur to precipitate out. That's the release from November 17th. We do have a few more. So let's bring those up from November 23rd. Today, there's that hardened crater floor all around with that silvery active lava lake surface. You can see a little bit of red there and there. The lava level is still pretty high in here, but you can still see this nice offset from the high point of the rim of the pit here and the current lava level, right? And before we've seen it actually spilling out. So that gap may be 1 meter taller, or maybe not discernible from this photograph and this image, but there you have it. There's that West Vent Pond opening and the West Vent Complex right over here. Moving through the photographs and observations, get to some the data here. There is that West Vent Complex, West Vent Pond, and a bit of glow in air right in there. Sometimes you see that in the infrared thermal image and the nighttime views from various webcams. Moving on. That went on there twice. We have a new set of thermal maps. So they not only got those other photographs, they did another aerial survey. So we so far have the thermal map. Just that active lava lake is got the hottest surface, but you also see the west vent and that southeast pit and that east central pit that's east of that island. And we've pointed out in a few times here, and we'll see again shortly. So that's the zoomed in view, and zooming out, that thermal image fits within that larger caldera as such. This is the current extent of the active lava that's crusted over within that collapse pit. The 2018 collapse extends as far as around here or so. So it's a crater inside another crater. That's within that other crater, which is this caldera all the way around. And even then we have a great caldera that goes even beyond that. So it's way down deep in there, and it's got plenty of space to still fill and pop over. And as we come up on Thanksgiving this week, I was reminded that when we were doing our projections months and months ago, it seemed like at the rate the lava was coming out, it might actually spill on to this downdrop block by around this time, around Thanksgiving. And it was just 2 months ago, September 20th, that summit intrusion deep underneath the lava lake. Since then, things just haven't been the same. The lava hasn't been coming up as fast. It's not reaching the surface as much. The lava lake isn't really rising as much. In fact, recently dropping. So we're kind of in a holding pattern, and it's really not moving anywhere. And if it's doing what it's doing now, then it will not spill onto the downdrop block anytime soon. So we'll just wait and see as usual. That was always a caveat. It was if nothing changes, if nothing significant changes, and that was also followed by, which is very unlikely. So now we see that how that actually plays out in the long term, right? The longer these things last, the more they can get disrupted. So that's the wide thermal view. And just to recap, let me find my here. In case you missed our full clip last week, I'll just play this. This is that extraction we got from that FOIA release, showing this scan of the crater floor, right, when they flew the drone with the visible and the thermal camera, and showing a little bit more of a close-up view of how they get that data before they release that map, right? So just a good reminder of how hot that thing is. That's kind of the Kilauea's Thanksgiving oven there. Getting a little view of the temperatures across that whole landscape. So pretty cool, and we will release a longer video pretty soon here in the next few days. So that's the USGS release. Let's move on to our webcams. I'll start off with a series of images that Dane pulled from the KW camera. This is that camera on the western rim looking in, and with all the various rain, you can see there's different rainbows. Here is an image from the 22nd, yesterday evening. You almost see two bands of yellow there, that rainbow, and that was a cool one to pull out, coming right into the lava lake right there. And following that, you see a view from earlier in the week where sunrise is coming up and the lava lake is actually glowing. And I thought it would be cool to put those two together. So here's a combined view of those two images. Rainbow coming into the active lava lake there and light coming onto the crater. So little bonus there this week. Here's the actual last full week of the KW camera, day and night. You see those same persistent spots of glow and no ooze of flows anywhere in the surrounding crater floor, as has been the case for many months now. And really there is nothing major changing to note and report here. Really it's the stability which is noteworthy, is how stable it's been for the last few weeks here, and unchanging compared to the rate it was changing. So F1 camera, similar, except we're not seeing the day and night variations in light. Consistent glow from the west vent pond, southeast pit, persistent lava lake, and then more occasionally you see this eastern pit flare up as lava circulates through there as well. So despite these lower amounts of lava coming into the volcano that apparently is, we're seeing from the signals, it seems like lava at the surface is still circulating and viewing good there. Zoomed in, this is a V1 camera. Zoomed in, there's that southeast pit, still overturning and staying open, and persistent motion to the lava lake from west to east still. Sinks, the lava recirculates underneath the crust there, and through this pit to there as well. Not a whole lot changing. Show it, documented last week in any case. And finally from the south, this is the S1 camera. So main lava lake, there is that eastern pit. You can see flaring up occasionally with a little hornado glows there as well. A couple other glowing spots around. From this angle you can more distinctly see the west vent itself and a west vent pond as separate points of glow. But you can see pretty reliable, persistent, steady, and no major change going on. Right, that's S1. And from there we will come into our monitoring. So this is the graph of the volumes that we have, and we did see those throw maps. We know that there's a new data point coming soon. Don't have it yet to put on a plot, but really this is the story, is that the volume is fairly unchanged since back in September. And of course we actually had an intrusion that probably dropped the lava level slightly and it came back up. So there's a little bit of wiggle in here that I'm not showing. In any case, we still haven't come very high up since then, and we'll see what the most recent value is that gets reported in the next few days or next week here. But would not be surprised to see it in this range of 111 still. Million cubic meters total. That's really the underlying story here, and then we can look at the details to explain what's happening in a shallow versus deep regions and that kind of thing. Fine spot here. And here is a plot that was shown at the recent meeting from the USGS, and this is still a big picture. Maunaloa is filling, and this is all GPS vectors and showing that it's swelling and pushing out in all directions. But see the arrows on the southeast side are bigger than the ones on the northwest side. So the southeast side moves more. Kilauea has been swelling at the summit and pushing out Wikahuna to the northwest and northeast, like all in every direction out to the side. And that's a separate pattern you see at the summit up here from what you see on the south flank. The south flank is this wedge right in here, right now, and there's more over in this direction, but let's just consider this part, and you can see that those arrows, maybe I'll zoom it in a little bit in here, these ones are all pretty consistent, steady in the same direction, not as big as these ones up here, but pretty steady and consistent. And I'm pointing this out, and you still have this mess over here where everything is kind of almost swirling in some ways. There's obviously some complexity this area. So I'm pointing this out because as we look at our graphs, this is going to become relevant again. So coming into our monitoring graphs, first of all, we'll run through the last week. Here is a summit depth of lava. Started off at 371.5 meters a week ago, and today we're at 370.5 meters. So that's 1 meter less. That's that 3 feet that we discussed, and kind of coming down, right? If you look at the tilt plot seems like it's not necessarily coming down, apart from the fact that we have two big deflation-inflation events that are happening here. You're not seeing, during the rise of the first deflation, you're not seeing the rise in lava level quite yet. It seems like it just keeps going down. It just kind of glosses over that little momentary rise. But if I zoom it out, it might be clearer. So here is the last week plus last two deflation-inflation events here. So really the tilt, you could say it's been kind of downwards right there. And back to back, maybe it didn't have a chance for the lava lake to recover. So this double deflation inflation corresponds to the same time here that we have the drop in lava level for the last month. And we'll have to wait and see. It's not quite clear here if the summit is actually deflating beyond these background deflation inflation events, right? They're not really telling us. They're telling us something about the subsurface recycling of the magma, we believe, but not so much of the state of the volcano swelling or not. So we'll wait and see what the plot brings up here on the right, but it seems like it could be just take the most recent data and possibly deflating. But if you go and look back at the whole last month, then earlier here, it looks like you have some inflationary trend still, even a net gain between here. So we'll wait and see how to examine that. But also important is SO2 for the last month. The most recent measurements all the way down here. That's around 350 tons per day. Previous one was 500. Previous to that, it was 550, less than 600. So really all the values the past month have been fairly low. Put us in perspective, here's a last year of summit SO2. So there's our most recent measurement right down there. But there's a last month. You can see it's part of this overall, if you look at the maximum values, been dropping for maybe 6 months or so already. Interesting to note that. So gas values have been steadily going down, and the gas output typically correlates. It's matches pretty well with the amount of lava coming out of the ground. So when you see the low gas measurement, and that would imply less lava coming out of the ground. And then you see, looking at the GPS, here's a 1-year GPS from Wikahuna Crater Rim north to south across Kilauea. And we have seen this long-term pattern of it actually extending, moving further apart as magma has been swelling underground and pushing the volcano sideways. That's what the arrows going all around the summit we're showing. But now that seems to be contracting. Let me zoom it in so it's a little more clear. There's that more recent contraction. We've seen something similar. We saw this back prior to the September 20th intrusion, which was right here. And we saw a couple other little wiggles as little adjustments occurred that might signify little blockages underground. But we have to look at this a little bit more closely to really understand what's going on here. But before I go into that site-by-site analysis, we can look at the last year of lull across the East Rift Zone. And this is something that we're looking at, how this long-term trend traction seemed like it had flattened out. Last week it looked like it might be increasing a little bit, but the most recent data here, and pending corrections from satellite orbits and all that, seems like it might actually be going back down again. So whatever little adjustment occurred was a temporary localized thing. It seems like it's going back down, and that seems like something that we and we covered last week, how all the stations in the East Rift were all dropping downwards even as they were contracting or expanding. It seemed to suggest that it was really like a sagging kind of motion, right? And now seeing this signal would not be surprising if that actually is the pattern that comes next. So that's the big picture. I wanted to show the GPS by location. So pulled up my Google Earth here, and the way that these components work is east-west, north-south, and up-down. So this is Wikahuna, northwest of the crater. That's right up here. And what I can show you is that It was moving to the north, now it's moving south. It was moving to the west, now it's moving to the east. It's reverse its motions. But Wikahuna still appears to be rising. Only this one other station at Byron's Ledge over in the east could potentially be showing some rise as well. It's maybe not as convincing. It could be, on average, fairly flat there. So really only one point of the volcano is rising. And if I zoom in here to the south at Crater Rim, which is the other end of that line, we measure the distance, it's moving back to the north and holding steady. And it appears to actually be dropping. These are now 2-year plots, so we're looking at a much more condensed slice here on the right side of this plot. But it appears to be dropping. If we come to the outlet over here, it appears to be dropping and reversing direction as well. So unlike what we thought was happening last week, where it seemed like pressure was building deep beneath the summit, I believe the magma is moving deep in the summit, but it's actually not actually building the pressure now that we see these signals with more clarity. Reversing direction, Puhimau, and going down. If we look here at Ua, it's an area that's actually stopped moving to the south, dropping down as well. And we can kind of go through it, but it's basically down, 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 down everywhere. And what I thought was interesting is if you come to areas like over here, which is this south of the Southwest Rift, and this is that south flank of Kilauea, and you look at this component, which is a north-south component, and see that the south flank moves to the south. Sometimes it moves faster. This is whenever it's sagging, is when eruption is happening at the summit. Moving to the south, and actually it's a little faster, a little slower, but then you can see really in the last month here, 2 months or so, it seems to be moving south faster. So that's visible here at the Mane station. I can go down here to the Kule station, and not as easy to see if I quite zoom it in on this view, but going south a little faster there. Coming down to a Hua Point, going south a little faster. Go up here to the Goat Pen, going south a little faster. Everything is going south a little bit faster in the south flank area. And so the south flank has been moving, but it's moving a little faster. And if that's the case, then when a south flank moves, because we have Kilauea's rift zones, summit, upper east rift connector, and then all through there, if this part moves out of the way, it can very slightly widen all the magma network in this area. And if it does that, then it can reduce the pressure. It could give the magma that's not reaching the surface somewhere to go. So for that reason, it's hard to really gauge how much magma is still coming into the volcano from deep. It could be coming in from deep and filling this extra space down there and causing the south flank to push a little faster and just not reaching the surface. But that's really hard to tell, and what we can tell for sure is not much is reaching the surface, given the gas emissions and the drop in the lava lake level there. So that's a little interesting tidbit there. It's really the south flank is in action here. Maybe I can bring up one of these graphs. Let's take you to so that really very northern part of the south flank actually stopped moving to south. Puhimau wasn't moving south as much, but here's one of those examples from Devil's Throat, slightly faster right in here. Right in there, it's kind of turning over, not the best example, but there's another one. This is from the Goat Pen once again. Maybe slightly faster there than there. For Mother, this one, Makai actually was going to the north. Looks like it might flatten or possibly is turning south. That's that area where it was maybe swirling in there. Kalapana Trail similarly was coming north and it may actually finally be turning around to the south. This one is Kule, so there's that slightly slower, slightly faster. More obvious in the Helena station. Slightly slower and slightly faster there. So this has to be part of our explanation of what's going on. Maybe there's a Mane station there where it's maybe the most obvious from there to there. So a little acceleration, and that could be what's going on at Kilauea. That's not potentially the only thing. We discussed how
But before you go on, can you show the scale of those for us? So we have a question about how much is those moving.
yeah, so here on the left, meters, and each of the tick marks is 0.02, so 2 centimeters, right? So the south flank moves a lot. This is the last 2-year plot. If you go, you're from 0.06 to where are we at the very bottom here, minus 0.06, it's moved 12 centimeters in the last 2 years. So that thing books and moves a lot. So that's why that's interesting to compare Kilauea to other places and between parts of Kilauea, but the reason wasn't looking at them right now is I'm just looking at the relative change in one location to the rates before and after. But yes, so for example, in the last, call it 2 months, that's 1 tick mark, that's 2 centimeters or so.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and so we did mention how Kilauea and Maunaloa may have a connection. It could be that the shallow Kilauea system is being affected by Maunaloa, and that's what we'll get to shortly. But before we do that, let's look at the earthquakes on Kilauea. Right down here. Recent earthquakes on Kilauea for the last year. So we haven't quite finished this daily bar here on the right. But you can see we're not on pace to quite reach up there, which is interesting. We're actually seem to be a little slower in Kilauea today, and that's an interesting aspect, that lower gas and maybe lower earthquakes too, and lower gas content all at the same time. That's curious there to consider whether the eruption could be dwindling or not. And here's zoomed in to the last month, a little bit more easy to see. We weren't at high levels before, probably averaging 40 earthquakes per day throughout most of the last month. Occasionally we have these little lulls as well, right? A similar lull on Kilauea as that Maunaloa lull last month, and that could be part of the story too, right? As Maunaloa is adjusting, Kilauea is getting carried along too, and Kilauea is Maunaloa's south flank, is on Maunaloa's south flank. So as that moves and adjusts, you could have a similar pattern mirrored here. So curious to note that, and that's part of that shallow connection of the volcanoes leaning on each other, looking at a much finer scale than the paper we're going to look at here shortly, but that could be the actual manifestation of that sort of thing, volcanoes pushing on each other. And looking at the last week of earthquakes here in a map, really not a whole lot. You know, there's big shotgun pattern of them all around, so showing that there is still some rock breakage down there. Pahala, of course, is still going on at its usual rate, but it's not as concentrated as if we've seen in some previous weeks. And maybe the best way to illustrate that is if I scroll down here to the last month. There's a last month, and you can see how in the last month it was really much more defined with this southwest rift extension of earthquakes as well, right? There is the rest of the south flank that normally quakes as it all moves to the south there. And we were just pointing out the stations all in this triangle kind of right in here. So this moves, creating a space up in here. So that would make sense, consistent with this lineation too. So that's interesting there. A little less earthquakes in Kilauea. But overall, going back to our source here at the USGS, really no major changes, nothing significant. This is not affecting the prospect of this eruption threatening people. Really, it's all changes of the magma system of Kilauea as it evolves and adjusts. That's kind of a normal part of the process, and so it's doing more of that right now. And we'll just wait to see, right? It's not at some point it's going to move into other parts of the rifts, but really it's more interesting at this point to consider this whole connection to Maunaloa. So we'll turn to that next as there are Hawaiian Volcanoes research roundup, and we're just going to cover the one paper today. But to put it in perspective, we have talked about this 10-year-old paper in the past by Gonerman and others, coupling it Maunaloa and Kilauea by stress transfer in an asthenospheric melt layer. This just means that layer down in the mantle, way deep down by the hot spot. Just think of it that way. So to recap, there is these two pathways into Kilauea, Maunaloa, and they're fed from the hot spot, and the hot spot has this kind of layer that's common to both feeder sources there, and depending on the pressure that's able to come out of one of these feeders, then it can essentially reduce pressure all the way back down the feeder source, which can then affect pressure at the neighboring pathway up. Right? So if Maunaloa is pulling more pressure, then it might reduce the input into Kilauea potentially. That's something that's a slower long-term process. We've seen the modeling results that indicated that you have something like a 6-month delay or so between one of the volcanoes doing something and having that effect visible in the other. But today we're going to look at, as we mentioned, the elastic interaction between Maunaloa and Kilauea. And this is published November 18th, 2022, so just last week. It's open access on Nature. And this is by Monica Prozior and others, a group out of Spain and Italy. And I won't go through all of this, but one important part of this, which is a big part of the paper I'm not talking about as much, is this independent component analysis. So they're actually using INSAR and GPS data, and doing a lot of this similar kind of modeling as we've seen in the past. But they're using this independent component analysis, ICA, to try to untangle the two different sources, the Maunaloa source and the Kilauea source. And it seems like they do that pretty well with this mathematical tool, essentially. So they spend time talking about that process of how that's done. But the bottom line is they're also integrating their GPS stations, which are shown up here in the upper plot, with the INSAR scans that ideally are capturing the summits of both volcanoes, so they can use one single scan and look at the differences in Maunaloa and angle capture there. And they do that over time, and you can then produce a model of so here is that combined INSAR on the left, and they try to break it into different components, ICA 1 and 2. So this is a Kilauea dominant, and that's the Maunaloa dominant with very little of the other. So this is basically just a support for the process working. And ultimately, they put together a model, and this is the long and short of what I want to talk about with this paper, is summarized by this graph. So a couple interesting things here. Let me zoom into these by panel. So they have a DM of Hawaii Island, this cross-section going across it here, so across both Maunaloa and Kilauea Summit. Maunaloa and Kilauea Summit, this is exaggerated, of course, and as is the size of these features in here. But Maunaloa essentially has one big reservoir that's largely one big blade. It doesn't have these multiple reservoirs that Kilauea expresses, having a more spherical, shallower magma reservoir, and then having this deeper one that, through their analysis, actually turned out to be more of a sill, more like of a flat blade, rather than being a large spherical body. Right, so that's another interesting result that we'll have to see how that plays out in research in years to come. But this is the ultimate reason why they come to the results. So they actually can model, for example, down here, this is what happens if this deep blade of Kilauea has extra pressure, right? And so that actually creates additional stress in the two ends of that blade, but it doesn't really come all the way over to Maunaloa. Maunaloa is all the way over here. So we see that's very localized effect of Kilauea, and it's kind of not strong enough to get all the way across there. If you see, this is Kilauea, Kilauea's shallow chamber. So if Kilauea's shallow chamber is inflating, then it's putting pressure in a larger area around Kilauea, but it's also still not reaching over to Maunaloa over here. In contrast, this is what happens if you inflate Maunaloa. Because of the shape of that reservoir in there, it seems like you actually get a fairly decent stress transfer. It actually comes into the shallower Kilauea reservoir. So one of the key results that they find here is that in this analysis, which actually I should have stated earlier, spans from 2003 to 2010, they see that inflation in Maunaloa can actually override and stop inflation in a shallow part of Kilauea, but not in a deep part. So deep part not affected. It's shallow Maunaloa, too shallow Kilauea, one direction, but shallow Kilauea does not affect Maunaloa. A one-way process there. So as Dane said at one point, Maunaloa, once she decides to bully Kilauea, she just steps in and just takes over by this kind of process. So the reason I bring this up now, timely, because
Maunaloa, oh sorry, no, hop in there. Basically, Maunaloa looks over at Kilauea and says, "Give me your cornbread," and Kilauea moves, right? Shows Maunaloa pretty good at bullying little Kilauea over there.
Yeah, so that's one way to look at it, and interesting to note that one way process going on right there. Yeah. So what was the last thing I was going to say here? Well, been that important?
Sorry for breaking your train of thought.
But to finish it up here,
wait.
Here is just to put it to look at it in a little more detail. This is the Maunaloa eruptions. This is from paper by Wright and Klein. This question paper, I think it's 1806. History of characteristics of magma input in Kilauea, Maunaloa. So this is plotted in magma volume in cubic kilometers here from Maunaloa. And this is actually cumulative magma volume, right? So here they're actually just going upwards, and here they're just showing the total volumes, right? So let's ignore that kind of mismatch there. But the point is that Kilauea had a very healthy magma input to the volcano that reached all the way to the surface prior to 1840. There was a big eruption on the lower East Rift in 1840. And following that, it seems like Maunaloa's pathways were more open because it has, beginning in that time, all the way through 1950, a much more elevated frequency and volume of eruptions there, right? So this is the most recent Maunaloa's active era. And then since 1950, we've only had the 75 and the 84 eruptions here, summit eruption and flank eruption. Right, so, and during this period of Maunaloa's big activity, Kilauea still has magma coming into it. You see not nearly as much as reaching the surface for this entire 110 years. In that case, is how long that long phase lasted, right? So that just goes to support that kind of idea, right? So we're not able to shut off Kilauea entirely, right? You're still having magma coming into the deeper areas, and it's going to find some way to adjust underground and pop up here and pop up there. But overall, Maunaloa, when it's very active, could be exerting its effect on Kilauea. And to look in a little more detail, let's look at this phase where we have this lower frequency activity of 1975 and 1984 right in here. I'm going to zoom it in. And if you look at the plot of Kilauea, we actually are pretty flat between these eruptions also. So Maunaloa took the baton here in 74, 75, all the way to 84. And for that time, Kilauea slowed down. In that case, not for 110 years, but in this case, it was 90 years or so. And since then, since 84, here's Kilauea uprise. So it could be possible, right? Well, who knows if we'll have a full-on eruption and this kind of pattern, but if you see it on a huge scale and you see it on the intermediate scale, you're probably going to see it at a small scale as well. Right? And that's where I'm getting at with this. That's the summary of how those things could actually affect there. So yeah, that is it for the roundup, and we'll see if there's questions on that and get into it here, Dane, before we wrap it up.
All right. Do want to thank a couple super chats that came through here recently. We had a $25 super chat from Chris Kiki, longtime support, says appreciating for all you do, Dane and Phil. Appreciate the support there. Michael T came through with the $10 super chat, says have some turkey on me tomorrow. Appreciate that, Michael. Thank you. And Timur comes in with a $50 super chat. Thank you for the regular updates. I appreciate that support there. All right. We do got a couple questions. Let me pull those up. Not really pertaining to the Maunaloa and Kilauea interaction, but more just looking at Maunaloa and the potential for an eruption there and what would the response look like. Heather asks, do you know if there is a grid evac plan for the south and west side of Maunaloa, helping prevent roads getting clogged in the event of a mass evac for somewhere like Ocean View that need to depart quickly with limited options? So yes, we have heard that concern as well. We share that concern with how the everything's going to get done. I have not seen any plans for like a grid style evacuation. You would hope there would be one, but it's something I haven't seen. What's your thoughts, Phil?
We haven't seen any kind of plan of anything at all, period, the end. So
Yeah.
we have heard civil defense say that they have plans and they have contingencies and all of that, but as I keep stating to them, and I'll keep stating it in public again here, if you can't show anyone your plan, then get public comment and input and address our concerns, and you're looking at an internal plan, not a public plan. So do you really have a plan? Show me to prove it.
Right. And it'd be one thing if they like handled evacuations and past evacuations with a deft touch, but it's been more the opposite of that. Thinking of the Waikoloa evacuation for the fire a little over a year ago now, and how chaotic that was, with traffic being backed up all the way to Waikoloa Village, and the access gate, the emergency access gate that they put in for an alternate route so this would not happen. They didn't have the key for it, so it was just locked. And the fire's coming, people are backed up. They end up closing down Queen K Highway and making both lanes run out, or just drain out of Waikoloa Village. But it was already too late if the fire had, ill intentions, like say in Paradise, California. Instead, it did about the opposite of that and avoided homes and avoided the road and played very gently with, everybody in the area. If the opposite of that happened, it could have been, chaotic, and it would have been, due to the evacuation in large part, if there was a loss of life. So that's where I am on the thing. Just speaking honestly, is
yeah. So I think what we've seen in the past is just a lot of figure it out when you get there, see what's actually going on, and so they've talked about we'll that's on the table, we can do that, but we haven't seen it actually planned out of. This is when it would be activated, this is when it would happen, and here's how much time we need, or we haven't seen any of that. So that's right. Why there's concern, and more work needs to be done. Absolutely.
No, for sure. All right. Let me see. Is there anything else that I missed? I believe we didn't have that many questions today. Do we have a question from Michael T? Can volcanoes produce sinkholes in a few years after eruption, or no?
Yeah, they typically are settling. The ground is moving all the time and settling localized wherever the magma is moving from one area, or if you have some underground voids. So absolutely, they can settle and create little sinkholes really at any point. Right.
And also, like the one I just went and saw was a woman in Leilani Estates that had a crack from the 2018 eruption that had widened itself, but all the fill and everything in there under the house was mostly intact. Well, all of that's been shaken out since 2018, and now there's a crack under the house that's about 4 feet wide in the wide areas, 3 to 2 feet in other areas, runs all the way across the house, right? So then that's all settling type stuff. That's all post 2018 stuff that's been just, happening from that large movement we saw in the ground.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, you could have actually just had the crack existing there before, not really changing at depth, and then just the stuff on top falling in, right? Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But you can also have, as the ground is, that's without the ground moving at all, and then if you add the ground actually can be moving, and then that creates potential for that to happen in a lot of places.
Right. Scott asks, is Hualalai done, or could it ever erupt again?
It will erupt again. And it's a little bit of a mystery of exactly how that'll happen. It seems like there's a much deeper magma pathway, and so it doesn't do it as often. When it does it, it's hasn't happened historically, but you look at the geologic record that's recent, it can be pretty intimidating how fast lava can come up and run downhill all over the ocean. So, but so it'll happen someday, and we just hope it's infrequent enough that we don't have to deal with it anytime soon. That's really the story in Hawaii.
I'll give like my normal breakdown on this. So if you envision Maunaloa, it's so big, right? Like a roulette wheel where only green is bad, where you can go in black and red. And that roulette wheel spins quite often, right? But you can sit there in the black and red all day and, 10 eruptions in a row and not get into the green, right? Residential areas. It's possible. Not maybe the most likely, but sure. On Hawaii, it's more like a coin flip that doesn't flip all that often, but when it does flip, it better be favorable, because if it lands on tails, that just means South Kona or Kona is gone, or Kailua Kona right through town, all kinds of bad things. It would not be pretty, but yeah, doesn't go that often, but if it does go, hold your hats.
Yeah, so I'll just finish with this. I mean, this last eruption was 1801. There was a seismic crisis in 1929, which means magma came into the volcano, just didn't reach the surface. The Kona airport's built on an 1801 flow. Geologically, the volcano is active if it's erupted in the last 10,000 years. So 200 is well within 10,000. That's really on a young end. That's still a fairly young volcano that it will erupt again, guaranteed. Just when is the question. It's doing it infrequently enough that it's hard to really say more than that.
Right. All right. Well, let me check one last thing. I believe that is the end of the questions that I have lined up. I don't see any more in chat. So we'll get out of here a little bit early. Everybody, I wish you a happy Thanksgiving. If you are on the islands, be safe out there tomorrow. Them winds could be a little bit tricky and a little bit feisty.
Yeah,
that'll do it for me.
Stay safe, everybody. Yeah, an interesting day. Like we're an hour and a half, and you're seeing us. We're a little bit early, huh? We had a standard back here, so like. We're a little bit late, actually. So, in any case,
how you look at it.
In any case, yeah, we'll be back with you guys next week. If something unexpected happens between then and now with the volcano, we will come back on for sure. But as we have detailed, we're not expecting that to happen. It seems like everything is in a fairly steady pattern of adjustment, and you guys have seen how this volcano does it starts and stops on a longer time scale than we live our day-to-day lives, right? So all that hubbub about Mauna Loa's earthquakes that occurred, or what were we talking about now? 2 months ago? 2 months ago now, almost?
2 months plus.
Just about 2 months, yeah. With those first ramp up on Mauna Loa. Now it's still waiting to see what happens 2 months in. And this is exactly why we were saying at the time, hold your horses, slow down, it's just not enough. And still waiting, and the evidence can keep building, but we're not there yet. Expect something to happen within the next week. So, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Until next week, from HawaiiTracker.com, Dane DuPont, I'm Philip Ong. Aloha, everyone.